Hi, this is Keith Much on United FM Radio and WFPN Norwich, Connecticut Facebook page. We're also on New London County No Rules. We're broadcasting in there as well. So we're on multiple pages. This is the Merging of Two Worlds show with Roy E. Bork, the author of the book The Merging of Two Worlds. And how you doing, Roy?
I'm doing good today, Keith.
And today's topic is creation according to Genesis. You want to go ahead and tell us what's that all? What is this all about?
Well, the Bible starts off with the book of Genesis, and it's in the beginning was the story of Adam and Eve. So they give us this story about Adam and Eve. They sinned against God, and that brought a curse against mankind, and this is what I was taught in Sunday school. I started asking questions about what this story meant and was very dismayed that they couldn't answer any details concerning the story. So the whole purpose here is to try to understand what is the story trying to tell us? So, let's start from the beginning. Concept of time. We were taught that God has always was and always will be, which means that there is no beginning and no ending to God. So, at 9 years old, I was able to figure out that there's an infinite amount of time before and after the story of creation. So I wanted to know what God was doing all this time. Of course, nobody knew. People think that the story is literally true. And this is where it runs into a problem, because the fundamentalists believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. Some believe, well, God's day is 1,000 years, so that would make it 12,000 years old. And there's a problem with that. We know that the Andromeda Galaxy is 2.2 million light years away. If we're only 6,000 years old, how can we see something that's farther than 6,000 years? It takes 2.2 million years for the light to reach us. And the Andromeda Galaxy is the closest one. The Hubble telescope sees far deeper into the night sky, and there are billions of galaxies far beyond the Andromeda Galaxy. Why can we see any of them? So it gives the idea that we're only 6,000 years old a problem. So the creation story in Genesis, is it factual? Is it myth? If it is myth, is it false? Or is it another way of looking at creation? And those were the questions that I was trying to answer. And over the years, I came up with some pretty good answers to those questions. So God creates the heavens and the earth. He creates everything on them, creates man. There's actually, and then it says man was made from the dust of the ground. Well, is that true? Well, the fact is we're all made from the dust of the ground. There's a process involved. Plants absorb water, and in that water, microscopic minerals, which is dust. And these minerals are transformed into the plant structure through the process of photosynthesis. Now, the plant is the food that we eat. So we eat fruits and vegetables. Those same minerals are transferred into our bloodstream. So our cells take those minerals to form our own cells. Now, a pregnant mother eats fruits and vegetables. Part of that blood is transferred through the umbilical cord to the developing baby, and the same process occurs. The cells of the baby are taking those minerals from the blood and transforming them into the cells of the developing baby. So we're all made from the dust of the ground. So there's nothing wrong with the story, except there's a process involved. Except the scriptures don't tell you what that process is. It just says God made man from the dust of the ground. End of story. But that's not the end of the story. But that's all that mankind in those days really could understand. So we're not going to give them a whole biology lesson. The Bible just tells we were made from the dust of the ground. Now, when was the story of Genesis actually written?
Good question.
It wasn't written 6,000 years ago. It was written around the 13th century BC. "6,000 years ago is approximate time for the beginning of recorded history. Now, we know that everything in history has a beginning and an end. So you have to define a beginning. And so the Bible set 6,000 years ago as a beginning. The fact is, the Egyptian Empire flourished for nearly 2,000 years, or a little over 2,000 years, before this story was ever written. So the fall in the Garden of Eden, when did it happen? Did it happen 6,000 years ago? Or did it happen at the time it was written? We know the time that it was written, the earth was going through some changes. The Israelites had a religious system that flourished for, like I say, about 2,700 years. But something brought the Egyptian religious system to an abrupt halt. And at the same time that was happening in the land of Canaan to the east, they were sacrificing their children to idols of Baal. Well, why? Because there's a problem going on. Basically, it was climate change. And the people were trying to figure out, okay, how do we recover from this? And that is when the story of Genesis was written. Now, what I discovered is that the word Adam, or the name Adam, was derived from a Hebrew word meaning man or mankind, and Eve is derived from a Hebrew word meaning the mother of all living. This story can lend itself to two literal people, can also lend itself to these people representing an entire culture. They both work. So one of the things I notice when I'm reading the story of Genesis is that there are two sequences in the book of Genesis. God starts out creating the heavens and the earth. Then he creates the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. And man was his final creation. That is Genesis chapter 1. Now you go into Genesis chapter 2, and it starts off with God created man. And then he saw that man was alone, so he started creating all these beasts and brought them to man to name them. And wait a minute. I thought God created beasts and the fowl before man. How can it be the other way around? So there's a problem with the sequence. And what that is, it's a clue that says that maybe this story isn't literally true. And so I said, I got to follow that. So, where do we go from there?
More questions.
More questions. So I asked, okay, what was the forbidden fruit?
An apple?
Well, that's what they said, but then they said, well, we kind of ruled that out, so that they didn't know. What did the tree of life represent? See, this is part of the story. There, in the center or the midst of the garden were two trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Okay, so I said, what was the tree of life and what did it represent? Well, they didn't know. I said, why did the devil take the form of a serpent? They said, well, the serpent was the symbol for the devil. I said, well, if that's true, then why did God turn Moses' staff into a symbol representing the devil at the burning bush? And their eyebrows went up and they said, that's an interesting question. And I'm saying to myself, yeah, what's the answer? And they didn't know. And then it says that Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain ended up killing Abel. For this, Cain was exiled to the land of Nod, and there he took his wife. And I says, where did his wife come from? Well, they said, well, Adam and Eve must have had other children that's not recorded in the Genesis. And I'm saying, why not? That's an important question. Where did Cain's wife come from? So they want me to accept the story, and yet they can't explain or answer any of the questions that regard the details of the story. I said, I gotta figure this out. Well, after much study, I started learning about symbolism. Understanding symbolism. Keith, you're a little familiar with the story.
Oh yeah, how symbolism we translated the symbolism that turned into a bunch of what's the word I'm looking for? Ideas and descriptions of religion, or the descriptions of events that transpired through religion, through these hieroglyphs and the Mayans calendar and all that stuff.
This is what we find in the ancient world.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Yep, that's what we find in the ancient world, is symbolism was very much a part of their life. We have to remember that back then, the average person didn't have a book at home. The only people that had books were the noblemen and the leaders, because books had to be hand-printed. The original books weren't actually books. They were hieroglyphs, carvings in stone or clay tablets. Then they had papyri, text. We're talking about something that, the average person didn't have. So much of the stories were told as a mythical story. And a myth is a way of taking a historical or a creation event and condensing it into a short version that is easy to translate from generation to generation. To say that it actually happened literally is not understanding why the story was written in the first place. Now, according to the story, God created the earth in what is called 6 days. What is the meaning of day? Well, there's actually 3 definitions to day.
In the day of.
In the day of. So let's start with the first one. The first one is the time it takes the Earth to rotate once on its axis. So that's a 24-hour period. The second period is the time that the sun is above the horizon. So this differentiates the day from the night. And the third one is what you just mentioned, Keith, is an age or an era in the day of. Well, that definition doesn't have a time period to it. So when we look at the ancient world, or when we start going into the geological record, there are epochs. So we have the Jurassic Age, and we have the Cretaceous Age, and I'm not familiar, don't remember off the top of my head what they all were, but these were ages in which creation was taking place, that life was evolving. Now that's an interesting question. Was it creation or was it evolution? And when I went to school, I was told I had to choose between the two. But I said to myself, evolution is a creative process. So how can you say that evolution isn't creation? It definitely is a form of creation.
Jim, I don't know if this is something he accidentally typed, but Jim typed, "I like waffles." Waffles have anything to do with this?
I don't know.
Jim, what are you talking about? Waffles.
Anyway,
go on, Ray.
So going back to God made man from the dust of the ground. Yes, he did, but there's a process involved. Evolution is a process. To say that evolution isn't creation is to not understand the process. But the process doesn't happen in 6 literal days. Well, they kept trying to tell me, well, why can't you just accept the Bible for what it is? And I says, well, all right, let me get this straight here. God sat around forever and then one day decided to create the heavens and the earth, and he does that in 6 days, and on the 7th day, he ended his work, and on the 8th day, Satan fouled it all up, and it's been fouled up ever since. Do I have this right? And they looked at me and they said, well, no. But I said, well, all right, straighten me out here, because that's what I'm hearing. So,
you need to define what is forever. What kind of time frame you talking here?
Forever is eternity. Now, according to Eastern philosophy, we are in the midst of eternity and always will be. That there is no such thing as where time ends or time begins. But to every event or age in history, there is a beginning and there is an ending. So let's go to this serpent. I had one thing before this. Man made in the image of God. I said to myself, okay, what does that mean? Well, they said, well, God is a man, a male deity. I says, really? How do you figure that out? Well, what they do is they reverse the scripture. The scripture doesn't say that God is in the image of a man. It says God created man in his own image. And I said, well, what does that mean? Well, we assume it's a physical comparison. But the Bible is a spiritual book. The Creator endowed man with creative ability, which is how we are made in the image of the Creator. It is a spiritual and not a physical comparison. So the scripture isn't false, it's being misinterpreted.
That's when it comes to the Bible and how it's been interpreted, how everything's been interpreted, it's you get into a big mess. And then that's where they say don't talk about religion. The interpretations are gonna get you into a big fight, a big argument.
That is why religion is a very difficult subject to talk about in public. If you're not in a church where everybody thinks the same, you are up for an argument.
Jim, if you want, call in. Jim writes, some people like waffles, some pancakes, some eggs. It's all open to interpretation. Priests are interpreting documents that are thousands of years old. Some facts get lost in translation. See more.
Well, let's take a look at something. The Bible that most people are familiar with is either the King James or the New International Version, but the Bible wasn't written in King James. It was written in Hebrew, which means the King James itself is an interpretation. And then from that, we are interpreting the King James. So, serpent. What is the serpent? Well, I go into Eastern philosophy, and it doesn't say the serpent is the symbol of the devil. It says the serpent is the symbol of deity. Why? Well, because of the way in which the symbol was chosen. So in Eastern philosophy, the serpent is shown swallowing its tail, and it forms a circle, and the end ends up in the beginning, which is how the cycles of nature work. The end of one is the beginning of the next cycle, and so it constantly revolves around. The serpent sheds its skin every year, which was a symbol of regeneration. The serpent has a forked tongue and a double phallus, which is symbol of duality. And so from the creation, you have good and evil. You have all kinds of dualities coming out of it. The serpent crawls on its belly, which was a symbol of humility. But the symbol is very agile, which is a symbol of resourcefulness. Now, many serpents are good for the agriculture, but some of them are deadly, which is typical of the forces of nature, in which most of the time the forces of nature are very calm, but once in a while you get a tornado or an earthquake or a hurricane, and they get violent. And so the choice of the symbol was because of all of its attributes. So why did the devil take the form of a serpent in the Garden of Eden? Well, the answer is because the devil was masquerading as a god. Not that there was actually a serpent there. I mean, I knew that snakes don't talk, and I knew that fruit doesn't endow you with knowledge when you eat it.
Now, wait a minute. What is the devil? Wasn't the devil a fallen angel?
That is how it is presented, as a fallen angel. But what is a fallen angel?
Someone who was kicked out of heaven?
In Eastern philosophy, the devil is actually part of your lower nature, your animal nature, the animal from which you evolved.
Right.
It is the beast within. So Eastern philosophy presents it as you have a lower subconscious and an upper subconscious. The lower subconscious is your animal nature. It's the beast within. The upper subconscious is your connection to the absolute, which is all knowledge. One of them, the lower nature, is depicted as the devil whispering in one ear, and the higher, the upper subconscious, is the angel of God whispering in the other. That's where that idea came from, is Eastern philosophy. So,
that answers that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wish fruit did endow you with knowledge. I wouldn't have to go to college. I'd just go to the fruit market and pick up the right bag of apples. But I know it doesn't work that way. So let's go to the trees. Keith, you got a symbol of a tree there. I would like you to put it on the screen if you could.
Go ahead.
Okay. In ancient philosophy, a tree might be depicted in this form, in which case it's not a physical tree, it is a symbol. This is a tree that my brother had drawn up. It's made out of words. It looks like a tree, because this is the way things were in those days. Trees were symbols, not necessarily an orchard. So, going back, I can depict chemistry as a tree, in which chemistry is the trunk of the tree. And the branches would be all the subdivisions of chemistry, in which case it would be fuels, lubricants, all the different things that chemistry uses, all branches of that tree. I could do the same thing with physics, mass, force, and motion. Show it in the form of a tree. And so I realize that this is what we're looking at when we're looking at the Garden of Eden. These are not physical trees that you would expect to find in an orchard, although one could see it as that way, but this is what we call the esoteric idea. So what was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, there are clues. It says it was forbidden. It says it was desirable. It says where eyes are closed, because your eyes would be open when you ate of the tree. And it says that in the day that you eat it, you will die. So trying to put all of those clues together. Anytime you're told not to do something, that's the first thing you want to do. So that's why the tree is desirable. It's forbidden for your own protection. Because if you do what you're not supposed to do, you're going to end up in trouble. It says our eyes are closed. Well, there are many things in life that you don't know the answer to until you actually engage it, and now you find out. Now you know. Now your eyes are opened. It's the eyes of understanding that are being alluded to here. And it says that we will die. Well, what kind of a death are they talking about? Well, I'm going to bring you to a story in the New Testament that Jesus talked about, the story of the prodigal son. He was a man, he was a nobleman who had two sons. And the younger of the two sons, he got a little antsy and decided he wanted to go off on his own. So he says to his father, "Father, give me my inheritance." So the father gives him his inheritance, and he wanders off, and of course he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to invest it, so he spends it on riotous living, and before long he's out of money. He's broke. Well, once he's broke, nobody wants anything to do with him anymore because he can't afford anything. So he finds himself homeless and hungry. He's eating the swill that they're feeding to the pigs. And he says to himself, "My father's servants have it better than I do." So he says, "I'm going to go back to my father, and I am going to tell him I've sinned, and I am going to submit myself to him and make me one of your servants." Well, it's what his father says on his return that I'm trying to make a point here. His father says, "Here is my son who was dead and is brought back to life." Well, we know the prodigal son wasn't dead physically. So what kind of a death is he talking about? And what he's talking about is the death of the spirit. Now, this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, does it still exist today? Keith, what do you think?
The tree?
Yeah.
Well, does it exist? Does it exist like we have it up on the screen?
No. The idea is there such a tree? Physically, you would say no.
It's all mythological.
What it represents. The fact is, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil didn't go anywhere. It's still around. And let me give you some of its branches. Drug addictions, alcoholism, compulsive gambling, unwanted pregnancies and abortions, domestic and gang violence, involvement with organized crime, to name a few of its branches.
Those are all part of the tree.
Those are all part of the tree. That is what the story is trying to bring to our understanding. You eat of that tree, it's going to suck the life right out of you. And most of the people that are involved in these things look at where their life is. They're homeless. They're hungry. Life is a struggle. It's exactly as the story is portrayed. This story isn't about two people that lived 6,000 years ago. It's the story of humanity, and it plays out every single day. I see it going on and on and on. People are still eating from this tree. They're still dying. They're still getting cast out of the Garden of Eden.
One of the things here, it says the tree of life is to withhold knowledge to those who can't be trusted.
Well, that's what I asked. What was the tree of life? And in the book of Proverbs, it tells us that the tree of life is wisdom. Wisdom and knowledge. Now, when I decided to go into the Navy, I signed up for the nuclear power program. One of the things the Navy did was to do a background check on me. What they wanted to know is, can we trust this guy with the knowledge that we are going to train him in? The thing is, you don't give knowledge of how the universe works to people who can't be trusted with it. That's why we don't want the terrorists getting their hands on a nuclear device, because we know what they're going to do with it. They're not going to use it to make a better world. They're going to use it to blow the world up. So, that is why the tree of life was guarded. Until you can prove yourself worthy of receiving that knowledge, you ain't getting it. I know many people that they live their own life the way they want to, and I keep telling them, you don't know what you're cutting yourself off of. There are many industrial programs that you will never be accepted in if you have a background of where you can't be trusted. So you have to get a reputation where you can be trusted, where you can be understood, where they know that you are not going to waste your time or using that knowledge for an evil purpose. So that's why it was guarded. And all through history, nothing's changed. Knowledge is not given to people who can't be trusted.
Well, that sums it up right there.
Well, you heard of Chernobyl.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what happened?
Chernobyl, there was a whole community, a whole city built around this nuclear power plant. And they weren't following certain protocols, safety protocols, and it ended up the reactor ended up exploding, destroying the whole entire community. It wiped out. It turned an entire city into a ghost town.
Well, that's the part that you've heard. Let me tell you what happened at Chernobyl. Two engineers decided to play a game with the reactor.
Oh, that's right. They were running tests.
They were playing a game. They wanted to know how long the turbine would freewheel after the power was removed. The reactor system was designed to prevent what happened from happening. But the engineers, they decided that rules were meant to be broken. So they were playing a game. And in the process, they had to override alarms. They had to lock out safety mechanisms to get the reactor to do what they wanted it to do. All the time they're doing it, the alarms are going off and said, stop what you're doing. The controls are trying to prevent them from doing it, but they locked them out so they would not operate. They intentionally, unknowingly, drove the reactor into an unstable condition, and it ended up running away and blowing up. So whatever happened at Chernobyl was preventable. Had the engineers not died in the blast, the Russian government most likely would have had them executed for doing what they did. This is part of what happens when you ignore rules. They ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and what happened? The entire countryside is radioactive to this day. You can't get near the place except for short duration.
Yeah, they give tours of it, but that's about it.
And you can only be there for a certain amount of time before they say you got to get out.
Right.
Well, Carl Sagan warned of a technological self-destruction. And this is what he's talking about. If we poison our Earth, either by nuclear war or by some other means, God's not going to wave his magic wand and fix it. We're going to have to live with the consequences, no matter how grave they may be. And that is what the story of Adam and Eve is warning us about. And they say, well, we don't believe in the story. It says, you don't know what it's trying to tell you. If you ignore it. They asked Einstein if he believed that there would be a third world war. And he says, well, let me tell you this. He says, I don't know. But if there is, I can tell you that the next war will be fought with sticks and stones. Because he knew that if there was a nuclear war, it would destroy our infrastructure and it would push us back into the Stone Age. This is the things that our leaders have to grapple with. We hope our leaders are smart enough that they're not going to misuse the technology that they have. And so far, I can trust them that the leaders are not threatening each other with nuclear war. But as more and more countries come to learn about nuclear weapons, such as North Korea, this is a situation that our leaders are going to have to grapple with. What are you going to do with it? How far are you going to go with it? Because God isn't going to wave a magic wand and fix the earth if we decide to engage in nuclear war.
No, oh no.
No.
Maybe over millions of years later, or a million years. What does it take, 1,000 years for the radioactivity to die out?
Not with hydrogen bombs. The problem is you're going to destroy your infrastructure. You're going to destroy your ecological system. The whole system basically has to start all over again.
From scratch.
You have to realize, if your entire infrastructure is damaged, I mean, what would happen today? We didn't have the internet. If you couldn't go to the grocery store and buy groceries, if you didn't have electric power plants to power all of your systems that make you comfortable, if all of that was gone, what kind of world would we live in?
Stone Age.
Yeah, I mean, all of our everything, agriculture, farming, transportation, everything is dependent on the infrastructure that we've developed. If our entire infrastructure were to be damaged or destroyed, what we got left?
Nothing.
You've got a few people in bunkers with food that may last them 5 years. Will the ecological system recover in 5 years?
I don't think so.
Well, this is the thing and this is what the story of Adam and Eve is telling you about. Don't eat from that tree. You don't want to have to deal with the consequences. So it's not about what happened to two people 6,000 years ago. It's what happens to humanity when humanity says we're not going to follow the rules. And now they find out what happens. How many lives have been destroyed because they refuse to follow the lessons of society? Don't do this. Don't do that. When I was a kid, we had the police come and tell us about drugs. They wanted us to know. The fact is, my eyes are closed. I don't know what a drug addiction is except by listening to somebody else. The only way I would know is if I took drugs and got addicted. I don't intend to go there. I don't intend to find out. I don't intend to have my eyes opened. So I understand the story, and I knew enough to stay away from drugs. I knew enough to listen when they said, don't do this, don't do that. So I was eligible to go into the nuclear power program, the United States Navy, because they said, we can trust this guy. So they gave me the knowledge, and I've got a pretty good background. And now I'm retired with a nice pension. Not a lot of people can say that.
Yeah, he got that right.
Now, the Garden of Eden is not a specific location. There is a place that probably was the Garden of Eden, and it would have been considered the Fertile Crescent, which is the area of Egypt, the Nile River, and the area of Mesopotamia to the east. But I want you to read you something here. It was written by Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, and it was applied to the king of Tyrus. And this was long after Genesis had played out. And he says, quote, "Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee."
Define iniquity.
Iniquity is sin. When you do what you know is wrong or what you've been told is wrong, you do it anyway. That's iniquity.
Okay.
Okay. Now, following that, Ezekiel says this, and I quote, "Thus saith the Lord, in the day that I shall have cleansed you from all your iniquities, I will also cause you to dwell in the cities, and the waste shall be builded, and the desolate land shall be tilled, whereas it lay desolate in the sight of all that passed by. And they shall say, This land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined cities are become fenced and are inhabited."
Now, can you interpret that?
The Garden of Eden is the land when everything is in harmony and balance and people are working together. And let's face it, today's world, we are facing a pandemic, and yet we're dealing with it. People are working together. They're helping each other out. They're solving the problems. That is what the Garden of Eden represents, is when everybody works together and says, we're not going to fight each other. We're in this together. And that's what the Garden of Eden is when everything is in harmony and balance and everybody's working together. So the Garden of Eden is not a specific location, although it may have represented a location in the distant past. It actually represents planet Earth when everything is pristine and everybody's doing the right thing. And now we have a world that we can depend on. So,
Anything further?
I think we've covered this pretty well. I wanted to explain the fact that the Garden of Eden is not a specific location and that Adam and Eve are not particular people, but they represent humanity. We are all playing the story. What did Adam and Eve do after they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
They covered their bodies. The first thing they did was cover their bodies up because they were embarrassed by their nakedness.
Which is, again, a symbol. Anybody who commits a crime tries to cover it up because you don't want to get exposed. You don't want the authorities to find out, because once they do, well, now you have to pay the consequences.
And what were the consequences of being naked? That's what I don't understand.
Again, we're going back to symbolism.
So it all comes out to interpretation.
Nakedness means exposed. You don't want to be exposed. So that's why everybody does this in secret. Whenever a person commits a crime, they do it in secret. They do it in darkness. They don't want anybody knowing. So they try to cover it up. And the moment somebody says, well, what about this? Oh, they've got an excuse. Or they got to find a way to cover it up. Because they know once you find out, the authorities are they're gonna deal with it. Now you're gonna have to pay the consequences.
Well, that kind of explains that.
I think that if people understood that this story isn't about 6,000 years ago, and yet it covers a historical time period. So again, the genealogy brings you back to the beginning of recorded history. That doesn't mean that the entire earth and the heavens and everything was created at that time. But that is a beginning of this story, because Genesis is actually a precursor to the establishment of the nation of Israel.
Now, when you talk about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was a world in a perfect, pristine condition.
Yeah, because at the time, well, again, let's take a look at that. When they were separated from the Garden of Eden, we're told that they're separated from God, which is essentially mankind in the ancient past had a connection to God. It's called their spiritual nature. And when you lose that connection. Indonesia, forget the year, they had an earthquake and it caused a tsunami. Why did the animals know what to do? Why did the people who are supposed to be so intelligent were taken completely off guard?
Because the animals are in tune with the earth?
Exactly. And when mankind says, well, we know better, we lose that connection. I mean, right now, one of the issues that we're dealing with, global warming. If we're not in tune with the earth, that could become a major issue.
Yeah, well, we're not in tune because we're a virus. Human beings are a virus to the planet, and we're causing a lot of issues with the planet. We're tearing up the resources. We're polluting the atmosphere. We're causing supposedly we're causing global warming. Now, if you go into all the scientific stuff with the global warming, they show that the planet's temperature has gone down and come back up. We've had ice ages. We've had warm spells. There was a time when the North and South Pole were full of life, and it was warm there.
This is true. There's a time in which there were no glaciers at all on planet Earth. But the thing is what they're looking at is global warming. The major issue is it's going to raise the ocean levels, and most of our power plants are along the edge of the ocean because they need water for cooling.
Well, we should have thought about that before we put them there now.
Well, yeah, in the same token, where would we have put them where we don't have access to water?
Right.
So the issue of global warming is the rate at which it occurs. It's going to eventually cause some of our infrastructure to be overtaken. So there are people in the process of trying to figure out where do we rebuild our power plants so that they're safe. So these thoughts are in motion. I mean, you say we're a virus to the planet. Not everybody is. There are a lot of people that have done good things. Mankind is actually, you've got some people that are not as intelligent as others, and then you've got people that are super intelligent. And you've got individuals that are preparing us for what happens in the future. You have other people that don't care what happens to us in the future. So it's a spectrum.
Right.
Not everybody is bad for this planet. Some people are, some people less, some people are actually good for the planet. The idea is who's trying to make the right decisions. And this is where you can't ignore what nature is telling you. Again, it goes back to the Garden of Eden. Our spiritual connection is what helps us to have answers to difficult questions. So we want, and that was all part of the restoration period. What the church says, we're trying to find our way back to God. Well, we're trying to find our way back to the source of life so that we have the right guidance, the right answers. That's what religion's about, is trying to find the right answers.
They say that religion is supposed to be the manual to living your life.
Well, it is if you understand it.
Right, and a lot of people don't understand it. They misinterpret the living crap out of it.
Well, that is an issue. I'm going to give you a word. Theology. I have a Noah Webster dictionary that defines theology as the study of God and the universe and the study of church doctrine. That's the current definition. I also have a 1904 Noah Webster dictionary, and I looked up the word theology, and that's only about 50 years prior to the copyright of the Daniel Webster. And it says that theology has two branches, natural and revealed. Natural theology is that which we can know of God by His works, through nature and reason. And I said, wait a minute, that's the scientific method right there. That's supposed to be one of the two branches of theology. It ain't there anymore. And the other branch is that which we can know of God by direct revelation. And this is what we call spiritual experience. So we have spiritual experience on the one hand, and you've got scientific method on the other hand, and the modern church is, where is it?
Still stuck in translation.
Still stuck in translation. If it wasn't for science, where would we be today?
Still believing that crystal spheres revolve around the earth or something?
So science needs to come back into religion. Religion has to stop pushing it away because it's one of the two branches of theology.
So they need to work together.
Well, that's part of what the merging of two worlds is trying to bring the idea that the scientific method is one of the two worlds, and the other world is spirituality. You bring those two worlds together, you have an understanding. Anyways, the merging of two worlds, available on the internet. If you look up the title, The Merging of Two Worlds, it will take you to a website. The website is scienceandreligionconverging.com, and it will give you quite a background on the book. It'll tell you why I wrote it. It will give you a rundown on what's in the book. All that I've said today is pretty much covered in there, although I write better than I talk. So
No, you do all right with the talking.
I write better because I have a chance to think about it, whereas right now I'm just ad-libbing as I go. So that's where we're at. So I hope I've raised a few eyebrows, make people think. I know one of the problems with religion is they don't want you to think,
No.
and yet that is what we're supposed to do. There's a scripture, I don't remember, it's in the New Testament, I don't remember the exact area, but it says, prove all things, hold fast to what is good. And how can you prove if you don't question things? If it wasn't for questioning, I wouldn't know what I know today. And so people have to question.
And we've definitely, well, I've asked a few questions today, but mainly I let you go down the list here and bring everything up. You did an awesome job, so.
Well, I hope people
Kudos
get
to
something
you.
out of it. I hope they realize that the story of Adam and Eve is a mythology and that it applies to all of humanity. And many people will benefit if they learn its lesson.
Well, eventually, after so many mistakes, people start to learn their lesson. But it seems like they gotta make a bunch of mistakes first.
And that is what it is to have your eyes opened. You have to find out the hard way.
Yeah, well, learning the hard way shouldn't be destroying an entire city with a nuclear reactor.
That's how bad it can get.
Yeah. Well, that's bad. You can't get any worse than that, wiping out an entire community with a nuclear reactor because you wanted to play games with it. And from what I watched documentaries about Chernobyl, and they said that they were running, according to the documentary, they were running certain tests.
Well, they were running certain tests, but
That were tests that they weren't supposed to be running, or tests that were proved to be dangerous in the end, obviously.
yeah.
So that's Chernobyl. They completely wiped out an entire city, imagine an area like Hartford completely abandoned because the radioactivity is so intense that you can't live there. And in the middle of it, you've got this reactor that's still leaking radioactivity. They have something called the elephant's foot. It's a big clump of material that's so radioactive that standing next to it for anything longer than a minute or two will give you a lethal dose of radiation.
If anybody's interested, I have the source of where I got that information. It was out of a book, and it was about an individual doing a research on certain disasters and what brought them about. I don't remember the name of the book.
Oh, you
at
don't
the top
remember
of
the
my
name?
head.
All right.
I think it was called How Tough People Make Good Choices. But it was talking about some of the disasters and what led up to them.
Okay. Well, we're gonna have to bring that we're gonna have to figure out the name of that book before the next show, so you can bring that up.
All right.
So is that it? I think we've covered everything,
Covered everything on today's list.
and I think we're pretty much done.
Well, like I said, I hope people have learned from this and that they look at the story all different. This is about us. This is about our future. It's about what we do with our planet. Making the right choices and listening to the people who are in the know. When they say, you don't do this, there's a reason for it.
Yeah, like wiping out an entire city.
All right. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Keith Much here with Roy E. Bork, the author of The Merging of Two Worlds. And I'm just going to show the book cover one more time. The Merging of Two Worlds, it's the